new Superman movie from James Gunn has flown into theaters. That means it's time to draw a line in the sand and decide which team am I on, Team Gunn or Team Snyder. Today we're gonna stop and rank all 11 Superman movies from the worst to the best. While I'm talking, be sure to join me down below in the comments section. Share your ranking of all the Superman movies you've seen. My list is not the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. And let's get started. In Last Steel, did you know in 1997 there was a Superman adjacent film starring Shaquille O'Neal? Probably not, because the movie made less than $2 million at the box office. Nobody went to go see this film, not even me, and I went to go see all the superhero movies in the 90s. Now, the reason I included this film on the list is pretty straightforward and simple. During my formative years where my sister and I would ride our bikes up to the comic book shop every Saturday was the era of the death of Superman and the reign of the Supermen. And one of the 4 Supermen during the reign of the Supermen was Steel, John Henry Irons, and they made a movie about him starring the great thespian Shaquille O'Neal. Now, I delayed watching this movie for about 25 years, and when I finally watched it, it did live up to its reputation as being pretty awful. It's harmless, but there's not really much of anything good in this film. To state the obvious, Shaq is not exactly a great thespian, not a strong screen presence. He's just a really big dude with a nice smile, but as an actor, he's a plank of wood with absolutely no charisma. The Annabelle Gish character is a blatant ripoff of Barbara Gordon's Oracle, but it's always so bad it's boring. Like, there's a couple moments of so bad it's good, like when our Oracle-esque character is in a wheelchair spinning around in a circle shooting rays at people. It's cheery and it's upbeat, so it's not exactly fun to dunk on it, but then again, Shaq spent his whole career dunking on people, so hey, he's fair game. This is a harmless, inoffensive, really bad movie. Number 10, Supergirl. Credit where credit is due. The score here from Jerry Goldsmith, pretty amazing. Casting of Helen Slater works well enough, and I believe this is our first shared universe superhero film because it's in the same continuity as the Superman films from that era. Everything else, a painful, charmless, incoherent train wreck.
How bad is it? My God, Superman, it's a nightmare.
The movie kicks off with Supergirl having to go to Earth to obtain an item, the Omega Hedron, which keeps her city alive, and without it, everyone will die. And the movie describes this to us with this delightful dialogue.
Without it, this city can't survive more than a few days.
Our lights will grow dim and the very air we breathe so thin.
Upon arriving on Earth, Supergirl apparently completely forgets the plot of the movie and that there's a literal ticking clock until everyone that she loves dies. And so she just starts flying around the Earth for a little while, where she sees sports at a local school and enrolls in college, where she joins the sports team and battles bullies. It turns into Revenge of the Nerds for like 15 minutes, and then with no explanation, this plot line ends and we get back to the actual plot. It's as if the screenwriter was walking through the halls of a building, bumped into someone, and accidentally shoved 15 pages of someone else's script right into the middle of Supergirl and just went, let's just go with it. From there, the main plot line about our villain is that there's an evil witch who is mad at Supergirl about a love spell gone wrong. The villain has absolutely no depth or humanity. There's no attempt to give her a relatable motivation. She's just selfish and really wants a boyfriend really bad. And the thing that makes this movie so painful is there's even some amazing actors in here. We get legendary actor Peter O'Toole of Lawrence of Arabia doing this.
Squirt. Squirt.
Hey, I'm an 80s kid. I grew up on these Salkind produced Superman properties, so I've got a lot of nostalgia for this film. But As an adult, I find it a pretty tedious movie to sit through. Next up, Superman and the Mole Men. If you don't know, back 74 years ago, there was a theatrically released Superman movie, Superman and the Mole Men, which was essentially used as a springboard to launch Adventures of Superman, the TV show from the 1950s. It was independent and low budget, and it's not even an hour in length, but it is technically a theatrically released film. And it's an important piece of comic book history, as it is the original Superman movie, but it is a little bit weird to include it in a list where every other film is a big studio blockbuster with that kind of money, and this is a very low budget 74-year-old film shot in 12 days. It essentially plays as an extended episode of the TV show. The effects are extraordinarily primitive. The plot of it plays essentially like a 1950s monster movie, except with Superman trying to control what's kind of going on in the film. It is a little bit interesting and subversive in how the Mole Men aren't evil monsters attacking people that need to be stopped. The actual villains are the humans that form a mob to attack the Mole Men. That's who Superman's trying to stop. So there's kind of a good message in there about not judging people, but it's not great. It hasn't aged particularly well. You know, it's abundantly clear that it takes place 2,500 miles away from Metropolis. There's very little action. The action that is in there is not very exciting because the effects and what they can do is just so unbelievably primitive compared to even what you could do 10, 15 years afterwards. You know, even the main conflict easily could have been resolved by Superman, but it's not resolved by him because otherwise the story wouldn't take place. So it is an important piece of history. Is it a movie that's good and worth watching in the year 2025? Not in and of itself. Number 8, Superman for the Quest for Peace. After Superman 3 and Supergirl didn't perform as well as Superman 1 and 2, the Salkinds, the producers of those films, decided to sell the rights, and they were purchased by Canon. And they wanted to return to the vibe of the first two films. Unfortunately, Canon, being a low-budget studio, didn't know how to produce a big budget film, and they had financial troubles, and that really sabotaged this film.
Canon at the time had come out of just real, in the old days, of real low budget movies.
They probably didn't understand how big special effect films need to be made.
I do know that cutting the special effects budget, I think, came out of their financial shortcomings.
When you make a big film like Superman, one of your stars is the special effects. It's an expensive stuff.
Last minute, the budget was dramatically cut, and nowhere is this more apparent than the fact that the movie reuses the same shot of Superman flying towards the screen. Beyond budget and production issues, the plotting of the film is horrendous. The first 15 minutes of the movie is a series of disconnected scenes that are Superman-type stuff, but none of it is actually driving the plot forwards. And then from there, it's tough to know how many of the issues here were script issues and how much of it was the movie was absolutely killed in the editing room. It's well known that the movie had about 45 minutes cut after a test screening. And the movie's only about 90 minutes long, so that means a whole third of the film was just cut, and you're left with the most bare bones version of the film with the action and the humor, but none of the connective tissue that makes any of it make any sense. There's a part in the movie where Clark is shown looking sick, like wrapped in a blanket. The very next scene, he's at the Kent farm and all of his hair is missing. And then the next scene is him full strength back to battling people with a full head of hair, and it just jumps between all of that without explaining at all what was going on. And the thing that makes this so sad is that this is the last time Christopher Reeve would play the part, and he really wanted to make it a good movie.
We're playing out the fantasy of what if there really were this person who could show up and end one of the greatest problems of our time, which is the nuclear race. And if we get it right, which I think we're doing, this will be the best of the Superman movies. And that's not just a pep talk. I think it really will be.
As I mentioned before, I grew up on these movies, and because this movie's trying to copy the vibe of the first two films, I find it to be a very watchable bad movie. I don't think it's good, but I can enjoy it. And we're about to get to Superman 3. I think Superman 3 is a better made movie, but this is a better Superman story.
I don't know how to say this, but I mean, there was a Superman 4, which did not help the cause of comic book movies.
Number 7, Superman 3, a very peculiar film. Because on the one hand, it was directed by a very competent director. It had a big budget, so it's a big, slick Hollywood film. But an absolutely bizarre Superman movie. At its core, it's a movie which couldn't decide what it wanted to be or who the villain was. You've got the evil business family that are like cheap knockoffs of Lex Luthor. You have an evil hacker, Gus. You have evil Superman. And then you have an evil computer that goes rogue. And all of this is being by a perfectly competent director, but a director that absolutely does not understand or respect Superman. So instead of the movie kicking off with this epic sweeping credit sequence or journeying to Krypton in epic fashion, we start off with a slapstick intro in the vein of Mr. Magoo. And even more insane, they decided to have the movie star Richard Pryor, which is absolutely insane. The movie literally starts off with Richard Pryor at the unemployment office trying to collect money and then learning, hey, I can get a job working on computers. The Richard Pryor humor all feels completely out of place, like he's just trying to riff and improv all of his dialogue, trying to be funny in a context where it just absolutely doesn't work. And the movie's understanding of computers and hacking and satellites is hilariously naive. And because it has all of these different villains and plot lines, it just feels like the movie's kind of meandering around for the whole first half, and the plot doesn't kick in till really about the halfway mark, and then it kind of goes off in this whole other direction about a gigantic evil computer in the third act. So it's just a very, very odd film. It's well produced. It's a slick made film, but with way too many ideas that just don't fit here. Christopher Reeve himself dissed the film before making Superman 4.
I had not been really thrilled with the way Superman 3 worked out. And don't need to say anything more, except sometimes things work, sometimes they don't.
Number 6, Superman Returns. It's a movie I've always liked that I've never loved. Little background on the film. There was about 20 years of false starts trying to make a 5th Superman movie. Most notably in the late 90s, there was supposed to be Tim Burton's Superman Lives starring Nick Cage. And then there was another one that was written by J.J. Abrams. And then finally, they hired Bryan Singer, who had just done X-Men 1 and 2, and he decided to do this quasi-sequel to Superman 1 and 2 that's essentially his love letter to the Richard Donner films. And for that reason, for me, it brings out all sorts of nostalgia. But the end result is occasionally great, but a largely misguided homage to a bygone era of comic book films. There's an elegance and sophistication to Bryan Singer's direction. It's wonderful at kind of capturing the energy and the vibe of those earlier films, except with 21st century visual effects, which means some of the action is great. The plane sequence in particular is awesome. The minigun to the face, thoroughly enjoyed it. And as someone that grew up on Superman 1 and 2 and loves those films, I can really respect what it's going for. But it feels like the wrong movie to make in the 21st century. It's almost a legacy sequel before legacy sequels were a thing, but the calibration just wasn't quite right. Some of that is the movie's just not exciting enough. There's too many stretches without any action, and too much of the action in the film just isn't that thrilling. Superman picks up a yacht. Superman picks up an island. That's not the best and most thrilling use of the Man of Steel. And in particular, Superman and Lex Luthor as characters had evolved since the 1980s. The characters were essentially reimagined a little bit in the mid-80s with the Man of Steel comic book run. Lex Luthor in particular went from this goofy mad scientist sociopath into kind of the version that we know more from the last 40 years as kind of an evil Bruce Wayne that is a public figure that's rich and famous, but behind the scenes is evil. And so when you watch this movie, it just feels like a very dated version of these characters from a different era, because it quite literally is being a sequel to films from a different era. So it's a movie that I always want to like it more than I actually do. I do like the film. There's a lot here that's really, really well done. But it's also a movie that I think is just too long. It's not obvious where it's 2 hours and 34 minutes goes. Not that much happens in the film. And so just things feel a little bit too, or not a little bit, quite stretched out far too often. So it's a very polished, very slick film that I think was the wrong idea at the wrong time, but in many regards done really beautifully. So I have all sorts of mixed feelings on this one. Number 5, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, the Ultimate Edition. And this is one of the most polarizing superhero films of all time, because many of you hate this movie, and then there's people like myself that absolutely acknowledge that it is a very flawed film, but also we love its ambition and think that its strengths outweigh its faults. This is another movie that had a long backstory of bringing it to the big screen. Over a decade before this film came out, Wolfgang Petersen was supposed to do a version of Batman v Superman. In fact, David Goyer, the person that eventually wrote this film, commented on the original version of Batman v Superman back in 2006.
They've been trying to revive the Superman and the Batman franchise for years. Kind of in despair, they said, well, let's do it, this combo movie, sort of like what Universal had done with Frankenstein and the Wolfman. Let's just throw them all into the same movie. And
jump forward a few years, he's the person that pitches and writes Man of Steel, and that movie came out right after Avengers, where suddenly everybody wanted shared universes, and Warner Brothers wanted their own shared universe.
Was there a rush to kind of throw too many characters in there?
So. I think so. And I just think, I know the pressure that we were getting from Warner Brothers, which is we need our MCU.
It was pretty early in the process that we were like going to bring Batman into the movie. Once you say that out loud, like we should have Batman in the movie, it's hard to put that back in that toothpaste back in the tube.
And ironically, back in that 2006 interview, David Goyer had this to say.
The problem with that is by making that movie, you're basically admitting that you've exhausted all possibilities with the franchise.
And of course, with the way the universe plays out, he ends up writing Batman v Superman. What I love about this film is that it's a movie that's actually about something. It's thematically very rich. From the very beginning, it recontextualizes the third act of Man of Steel. Likewise, they start exploring the idea of, if you have someone as powerful as Superman, how would the world respond to that? What should you do with that? And that becomes both the plot and the theme of the movie. And so it's a very thematically rich and dense film in a way that many films are not. I think Snyder does a great job with the action, but Zack Snyder's just always great with just iconic imagery. It's also a movie that is very convoluted with its plot. It's trying to be kind of 3 different movies at once. One of them is kind of Lex Luthor and Bruce Wayne trying to stop Superman in reaction to Man of Steel. We're trying to set up Justice League, and we're doing the death of Superman, all in one film while trying to be thematically rich at the same time. And that's just too much to try and fit into one movie. as much as I could sit here and I could agree with most of your criticisms of the film, I can say I understand everything that you're saying here, that they rushed it, they needed to do setup movies, the plot is convoluted, it is an awfully grim and cynical movie, but at the end of the day, am I still attracted to this film? Yes, I am. Do I watch it and love a lot of what's in here? Yes, I do. Number 5, Superman 2, both cuts of the film. And this is an example of where if we had a proper, true version of Richard Donner's version of this film, I'm pretty sure it would be several slots higher up on this list. But as is, we have 2 Frankenstein monster versions of the film, which I love, but also they are both flawed versions of Superman 2. If you don't know the backstory of this film, Superman 1 and 2 were written together, and initially they were being shot together. In fact, 70% of Superman 2 was shot during the production of Superman 1. But the director of Superman 1, Richard Donner, and the producers, the Salkinds, were constantly butting heads, where Richard Donner was trying to respectfully bring this American mythology to the big screen, and the Salkinds, the people in charge of the money, were worried about money and trying to do everything cheaper.
Mr. Salkind, with it all, very smart man. I don't think he or his son, all these people, I don't think they had any concept of what the film would be. Their sole interest was, how do we make it cheaper? Eventually,
They realized they just needed to put all of their effort into finishing Superman the movie, but they had shot 70% of Superman 2. After Superman 1 came out and it was a big gigantic hit, and they decided to finish Superman 2, the tensions between the Salkinds and Donner were so high, they decided not to bring him back, and they brought in another director to finish Superman 2. But for that director to get credit as the director, they need to have shot over 50% of the movie, in which case they started to rework the film, add new scenes, and give this new director his kind of fingerprint on the film.
We didn't use what didn't fit. We worked around what was there. We had to invent new things because it wasn't the same picture. And what we did, and Lester did, I think, wonderfully, is he adapted the whole second picture. We went the comic book thing.
So when you watch Superman 2, either version of it, you're kind of watching this Frankenstein monster of a film. With the theatrical version, you're watching a film that is over 50% Richard Lester, who didn't really understand Superman, so he gave him a bunch of really weird and wacky powers. All throughout the film, you see Kryptonians do things that Kryptonians are not able to do. And then you have these other sequences shot by Richard Donner that are very respectful of Superman and trying to make it this big epic, not a slapstick comedy. If you watch the Richard Donner cut of the film, he wasn't able to shoot 30% of his movie, and so 30% of it is test footage, literally screen test with the actors, footage from Lester. Some of it is reusing footage. It reuses the ending of the first movie because the turn back time was supposed to be the end of Superman 2, so they reuse it. It's flawed in its own ways. A completed version of it would have been much better than the theatrical version, but it's not a completed version of the film. But diving into the movie itself, Zod and the Kryptonians are much more compelling villains than Lex Luthor in a real estate scheme. This movie lays the foundation for the sequel to a comic book epic, where our hero has to learn to sacrifice what he wants for the greater good. It's the same exact tension that's in Spider-Man 2. This has been used many, many, many times in comic book movie sequels, and it all goes back to this film. Because he's fighting Kryptonians in the third act, it's a more thrilling third act in the film. And that's where I think if we had the true proper version of it, it would be right up there with the original Superman for me. But we don't. We have these 2 flawed versions of it that in their own way compromise the integrity of the film, while still being a movie that I absolutely love. Real quick before I give you my top 3 and answer the big question, who comes out on top, Donner, Snyder, or Gunn? Be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of the Superman movies that you have seen. Also, if you enjoyed this video, I've done a ton of other superhero movie rankings, whether you want a ranking of all the DC movies, whether you want a ranking of James Gunn's films, Zack Snyder's films. I've done all of that fun stuff before, and I've done some deep dives into most of the big Superman movies, so I'll have something linked all around here for all of that fun stuff. If you enjoyed this video, there's a lot more where this came from. In third place, James Gunn's Superman. The big question of the day, do I prefer Man of Steel or James Gunn's Superman? And honestly, I don't know where I will land a year from now. My gut reaction at this moment is that my preference is for the more epic nature of Zack Snyder's film rather than the lighthearted fun of James Gunn's film. One of the things I just kind of loved about this movie is that it really is extraordinarily comic booky. It's not embarrassed about the weirder, wackier side of the Superman lore. It leans into all of it. And whereas most comic book movies that kick off a universe or kick off a franchise, our superhero is the first extraordinary being that world has seen. Here, extraordinary beings have been around for 3,000 years. It's normal to the characters in that world, but it's new for us as the audience to go and explore a world that just goes for it. Likewise, we get a very hopeful Superman. He truly is the grown-up Boy Scout that loves saving people, and that's where his identity comes from. Crypto the dog is absolutely adorable, and I wasn't even sure I would think of how I would feel about Crypto, and then they built out a world where I could absolutely buy into it. Mr. Terrific steals every scene that he's in. I love that the plot is designed in a way where even Jimmy Olsen and even Tessmacher and Lois Lane all kind of tie into the grander narrative while being very Superman focused at the exact same time. There's like very little Clark Kent in this movie. I do think that part of my problem, one of the reasons I prefer Man of Steel over this film just a little bit, is that this is a movie that has so much spectacle, and it treats the extraordinarily as so common that it diminishes the effect of it. It just becomes very episodic instead of epic. And it just becomes commonplace that these things happen, so much so that people are just sitting there eating ice cream while a kaiju is destroying Metropolis. But like I said, I really enjoyed this film, and I like that it is this fresh new take, that is a return to a more classic version of the character with a populated world that's able to go places most comic book movies aren't able to go because it just leans so hard into those aspects of the lore. Our runner-up, Man of Steel. Zack Snyder, David Goyer, and Christopher Nolan's reimagining of Superman, and one of the most polarizing films on this list, where people that like it love it, and a lot of people just absolutely could not connect with this film. If you don't know the backstory on this one, David Goyer was working on the script for The Dark Knight Rises.
The legend is that Man of Steel came out of writer's block on Dark Knight Rises.
That's true. We were blocked, and Chris said, okay, let's just take a week off.
We had writer's block, and I had some old Superman action comics. Just started reading them and just spent a couple hours randomly writing up a take.
He pitched it to Christopher Nolan, who also got excited about it.
I told it to him, and he said, I would produce that if you want. He literally called up Jeff Robinoff, then head of Warner Brothers, said, Goyer's got the Superman take. I think you should hear it.
Nolan didn't want to direct the film, so they started looking for a director.
My friend Christopher Nolan called me and said, would you have any interest in making a Superman movie? David Goyer and I wrote a Superman script, and I don't think I want to do it.
And this is a movie where I left the theater and I enjoyed it, but I also had to process it for a while. I actually wrote a review of it on a blog that I had at the time, well before I was on YouTube, and even kind of discussed how much I needed to rewatch it to fully absorb it and accept it on its own terms rather than based on my expectations. Coming from Nolan and Goyer, who believe in these anchored realities, but also coming from Snyder, who believes in iconic imagery and symbolism, and has a very specific aesthetic, and has this postmodern way that he explores superhero stories. And
Watchmen, yes, it's a complete deconstruction. Like, you took the entire thing apart, the car. In Man of Steel, the thing was put the car back together now.
And that's not going to be for everyone, but it's a film that I love that it has such a distinct vision for the character, a distinct vibe in a world where there's so many generic, mediocre blockbusters that feel produced by a committee and focused grouped into being optimized for the broadest possible audience. This is a movie with a distinct vision and flavor to it. And that flavor won't be for everybody, but it is for me. Like, deep at its core, it's telling this epic story of if Superman emerged, it would be the biggest event in human history. And it leans into that. I love all of that stuff. Adding to that, you get a fantastic Hans Zimmer score. Now, I don't know that anything can top John Williams' Superman score for me, but this is like as good of a second place as you can get that fits the movie, fits the tone, fits the vibe, and gives it its own epic nature to the entire film. Absolutely, there's flaws in here. Structurally, it's a little bit clunky. It gets a little bit convoluted when you start getting into like the codex and Kryptonian predestination versus free will. It's like, but at this moment, just the nature of this film and what it does in just evoking this epic concept of the last son of Krypton emerging on the world stage was able to move me in ways that James Gunn's film didn't. That was fun and had its own things that really worked. This one, I think, just the epicness is what elevates it. But coming in first is Superman the movie, the original superhero blockbuster. This is the first time that producers went, Superman, that is a property that is big and epic. Let's treat it that way.
To give the Salkins credit, they saw, I guess, the future in making a film out of Superman, which nobody did. Warner's actually owned DC Comics. They could have made it anytime they wanted to.
And so the Salkinds, a father and son duo, decided to get the rights to Superman, and they went all out with this thing. They hired Mario Puzo, author of The Godfather, to write the script for it. And keep in mind, at the time they did this, we're just talking about being a year or two removed from The Godfather 1 and 2 coming out. They hired Marlon Brando in the 70s to play Jor-El, which this is unheard of. This is like the biggest names in drama being hired to do a comic book property at a time where the genre did not exist. And they brought in incredible, dramatic, Oscar-winning talent to tell this story and gave it this huge budget. And a big part of what made it work is that they hired Richard Donner direct it, and Christopher Reeve to star in it. And both of them understood that this was American mythology, and they felt that was a burden that they needed to bear to treat that with respect.
So I felt that during the 70s and 80s, I was the temporary custodian of a part that is an essential piece of American mythology.
Richard Donner in particular, his slogan in making the movie was verisimilitude.
I have a sign to this day in my office of Superman flying through the air and dragging a sign by him that says verisimilitude, because the story had to have its own honesty. Everybody had to believe it was real.
And when you watch this film from the very beginning, it just doesn't feel like the way comic book movies are made anymore. In fact, they've never been made like this except for this film, where from the opening of the film with the credits, it just feels so large and epic. You go to Krypton right afterwards, and it feels like you're just watching something special and big and truly epic.
On Krypton, I was intending it to be almost semi-biblical, and people spoke in very stilted, elegant English.
And then you move into the Smallville sequence, and it's designed to just feel like classic Americana and grounded in a reality. This epic character brought into very normal day-to-day life.
I guess it did have a feeling of Norman Rockwell.
That was written that was a very bucolic style, very Andrew Wyeth.
It was really small town USA, as all the artists had done in the 30s and the WPAR.
And then, of course, we get to Metropolis, and it turns into this thrilling superhero story that's romantic. This is the movie that laid the foundation for the entire genre, that said that this isn't just kiddie stuff. This is something worth taking seriously. And that, the credit to that really goes to Richard Donner and Tom Mankiewicz, the screenwriter that he worked with to kind of punch things up, that decided to kind of take it to this whole other level. Absolutely, there's things about it that are dated, that haven't aged very well, but also this is the movie on which every single comic book movie since is building on top of the foundation that this movie laid. Therefore, for me, without question, it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, remember I've got a whole bunch more like it. My ranking all the DC movies, James Gunn movies, Zack Snyder movies, all that fun stuff, plus some deeper dives into some of the Superman movies. Thank you so much for watching. Keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.